All right, so we are almost at time, about a minute, and certainly the introduction will take a little bit, so it's okay if folks are still rolling in. Welcome to the end of Ignite. Great job, I think, on all parts. I think the attendees and feedback and questions and everything throughout the event has been really energizing for myself and the team. I talked to a lot of the engineering folks over the days, and they just are really inspired, certainly, to get the right questions, get the right feedback. They're very much taking a humble approach, and I think they have already. But from the leadership top down, hopefully you're seeing what feels like a new Microsoft. I don't think it's net new. I actually think we've been moving in this direction, but with a lot of what Satya is doing on down through some of the new leaders, even for SharePoint and OneDrive, they're under a new engineering leadership. They definitely are able to go at a pace that works, working with the right communication work streams. And certainly my job is to work with engineering to make sure that what they're doing is well known and timely, so we're not falling behind. But the intent of the session today is really to be that catch-all. Any questions that you didn't find the right person, I may not be that right person, just to be very clear. I'm not your deep hardcore developer, and I'm not a deep IT pro, but I work with all of them, and I'm certainly on the team, and I've been for a while. So I'm pretty aware of everything that we're doing. I may lightly answer a question and refer you to either somebody else or some other set of materials. But certainly, hopefully, it's more of a question of, did I hear this? Did I hear that? Or what about this? Or, I don't know. And so I'm really going to open it up after about 10 minutes for questions. It's a format I think you've seen the MVPs do. It's a format that I've seen a number of other teams across Office and I think in Windows and Azure they did similar things. It's something I've done internally, so really my mantra is, if you have a question, ask it. I will have an answer. I'll absolutely answer anything. You might not like my answer, but I will answer it, and I'll try to answer in a way that gives context to what we're doing, give context to what you may have missed across the week or where we're going. So hopefully you'll get a lot out of the session, if anything, just to make sure you get that last question before you leave to wherever you're going back to. I feel like at the end of at Ignite, it's that end, where Ferris Bueller walks out in his robe, and he kind of says, "What are you still doing here?" So I ask you, what are you still doing here? But then, of course, I say thank you for coming to the last session. And, there goes the timer. And then throughout, I've got a couple of giveaways. Some might be a little small size. Some of these shirts are a little bit small. I've got a special one. I won't tell you too much about it. It may look a little plain, but it's got something of significance. And then I've got a little friend that can wave his own paw. And then a couple of fun things that I'll kind of get to. It's more oriented around, certainly if you have a question. I don't have that much to give away. Hopefully there's a lot of questions more than I can give away. But the special one, hopefully you'll see how I narrow it down to hopefully get to the right person. One other note, just to call out sort of the how we're doing the presentation. Hopefully you're here in the right place. It's SharePoint Unplugged. And my name is Mark Cashman, Senior Product Manager on the SharePoint team. I've been doing SharePoint stuff for the last 7 years. I started building a media and entertainment solution on top of SharePoint in 2007, and we brought that into 2010. And then I joined the team to focus on SharePoint Online, and most recently, next-gen portals, a lot of what we're doing around SharePoint 2016 that isn't Bill Bear. I get everything else. And this whole presentation is being done in Sway, so it's a little bit of a new public thing for me. I've done it internally one time, and it seemed to go okay. And it's something you can actually follow along with right now. I've got a short URL here, the aka.ms SharePoint Unplugged. You don't have to capitalize, but I just kept consistent visually. But if you hit that on your mobile phone, whatever device, operating system, browser, it's meant to really be, when you see the format that I've put together, it's really just, maybe I do have a question on that or that or that. And you'll see I've kind of got main sections, lots of bullets, and then links to lots of other things. Some I'll reference and cover in depth, and some that I will really just have as a reference point. But of course, everything is starting to fall online. So if there's something that I do refer to or link to, most likely it's to the Channel 9 recording of that session. And I'll certainly probably add more even after the session, because not everything is online. And some of the links are active, but the video is not there yet. So if you go to the first link where it says related content here, that's literally everything that was tagged with SharePoint. And it's over 150 sessions, hands-on labs, those kinds of things. So you can refer back to that. And the way that they've built the conference is you can do a lot after the conference. And then the one where here on Channel 9, that's specifically just a filtered URL on the keyword SharePoint, for every video that's been posted there. So if we travel down on the sway just a little bit more, I don't know exactly how your week started, but this is just a little bit on how my week started. I got here Saturday. Lots of people got here on Sunday for the pre-days. We had 2 pre-days where we covered hybrid and end-to-end OneDrive for Business setup. We had a lot of great speakers, a lot of new material. Even though it was sort of a deep dive training, there were also some announcements that came out of those pre-days. But this is just sort of how I spent my first day getting to know Chicago, and hopefully everybody now knows Chicago very well. This in particular was a really good Guinness at a really good Irish bar. And that burger made it harder to walk back to my hotel. So if we look at SharePoint Server 2016, obviously that's a big thing that we've been talking about here. Some people have been giving us feedback we didn't talk enough about it. But to be very transparent, where we are with the release cycle, obviously we're not yet at beta. That's coming. That's the date that you see here. And looking to release Q2 of 2016 calendar year. So the intent for us was to start to peel back a little bit more of the onion. We had put a blog post, which you'll see linked at the bottom here, SharePoint Server 2016 update. So there's a lot of information leading into MS Ignite. And then here we shared a larger session. We had an IT Pro session specifically with Bill Baer, and that's that picture that you see here, where I don't know if anybody went to it or has been to that room, but he filled it pretty well, and you know Bill, he does a great job. So a lot of stuff that came from him. Where we focused to share the information, this next level of information for SharePoint 2016, was really to focus on some of the new user experiences that are coming, some of the cloud-inspired infrastructure, which is really, there's a ton of value, and I land on a couple here just as reference, and then around what we're doing around compliance and reporting. And this is all in the box. When I get to the next section, you'll see where we're continuing to extend what we're doing with SharePoint and the value in 2016. But really, this first part is just to consolidate what's actually in 2016. The most important thing about 2016 to understand is it's coming from the cloud. It used to be the other way around. We started BPOS with SharePoint 2007, and we stuck a product and tried to make it a service. And it was pretty good. Did really well with team sites. Did well with some other workloads, certainly from a MySite perspective. But some of the other areas, when you think of some of the deeper level of customization, deeper search like FAST and other things, and on through the years, it really has been, now let's put in 2010. Let's upgrade it to 2013. What really we have in the cloud right now is SharePoint 2016 ++. And what we're going to cut for on-premises will be a lot of that value. Ton of value for IT, good value for end users. I'll walk through some of that. And certainly from a lot of what the development team has been doing, everything applies. But not to discount that you can still do full trust code if you choose to move to the new app model. And a lot of what the team shared at Build and this week, there's a lot of new patterns around add-ins, and certainly all of the new Office 365 API endpoints. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But SharePoint 2016 really benefits from everything that we've been doing in the cloud really since November 2012. And that's when we cut SharePoint 2013. I mean, not cut it, but cut a build and made it available as a version. So everything from there on, I'm watching my words because Mark in the front here wants to make sure that I don't ever infer that SharePoint is a la mort or dead or anything. Because if you haven't noticed, we have a new version coming. We have a whole team behind building and making that new version awesome. And some of the stuff we do in the cloud is just going to land there first and then come down. And if you don't believe me, you should really see all the sessions we've had. And if you've talked with all of the engineers, they're pretty jazzed about what's landing on premises. And there's a whole team, thinking on how they take that forward for service packs and other things into the future. Our 2 biggest sessions were the foundational session with Seth and Bill, and then the What's New for IT Pros, where Bill covered a ton of stuff. Some of the things that he covered from an IT Pro perspective was the new min role. So there are a lot fewer roles that you need to define, making that hopefully easier to manage, lesser footprint. From a min DB perspective, anytime you can have fewer content databases, that's a good thing. Usually it means fewer servers, easier to manage. And then specifically around zero downtime patching, it's something we've been doing in the cloud for a long time. Quick raise of hands, who's been here since the BPOS days as far as the cloud is concerned? Who remembers the amount of read-only or downtime we took during an upgrade? So yeah, usually groans and moans. Who remembers in the last 6 months where we took a read-only? I don't mean that we didn't have bumps and bruises here and there. We certainly recover that from a service SLA perspective. But the last time that we had to take a 30-minute planned downtime for patching, for upgrade, Hopefully no hands go up. All of that benefit, of course, benefits SharePoint Online in Office 365, but it's coming to the on-premises version of SharePoint as well, which for an IT pro is like, yeah, go to the business unit and say, you know what, I'm going to disturb you a lot less when I need to do a security fix or a SQL thing or but certainly they've made a lot of innovation there, and it's because we just can't keep doing that in the cloud. So I encourage you to look at some of these materials. Of course, there's a ton more coming as we get near to beta. Our biggest goal is that we will have documentation at beta time. In 2007, it came 6 months later. In 2010, it came right at release. In 2013, it came with beta, and best feedback we've gotten is when it comes with beta. And certainly in some of our early TAP engagements, there'll be enough information to get people started, but the real documentation will land at beta timeframe. So if that sets the stage, let's talk a little bit about hybrid. And again, I just want to reiterate, this is not going to be me talking for the whole 75 minutes. It might feel like it for about the first 10 or 15, but I'm really trying to seed you with what happened this week, what have we talked about, and certainly maybe you came with a question, but if you didn't, this will seed you with some ideas of, what can I hammer Mark? What can I ask Mark about? So hybrid, I think we've been doing a lot of great work. The rumblings I heard is, we're not doing enough. But at the same time, my personal opinion is we are doing more than we ever have. And some of it is improving even stuff that we've had for a while. A lot of it is making it so that when 2016 lands, it'll be the most hybrid potential if you go that direction. But we started off with a pre-day for hybrid. That's the picture you see here. And we had, I think, 7 or 8 presenters across multiple modules. And they were all really great new information. It kicked off with one of our engineers talking about the overview future of hybrid. There's a lot of great nuggets to find there. But, at the helm was Bill Bear again. And he was driving through with a lot of our deep SMEs going through how to do this, how to do that. And certainly all that material will be available. But we did talk about hybrid search. It started out, hybrid search was a federated query. Now it's a singular index with a specific component that ships in 2016 that's called, new name for me, they used to have a different name, Cloud Search Service Application. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Where your index lives is the cloud, but effectively you can search from across on-prem and online and have that singular index that gives you that relevancy that's been lacking in hybrid search. Still, there's configuration and setup to accomplish it, but that's going to get easier, and certainly out of the box a lot easier to connect with your cloud environment. And it could also be, applicable to a VM. Business connectivity services is getting a lot of investments as well. It's something that we're continuing. It's something that's supported in online and on-premises. And in 2016, and then certainly it's already in the cloud, it'll just be a lot easier and a lot more reliable to connect to back-end systems. One of the things that we shipped in SharePoint 2013 SP1 was the ability to, if you're on-premises, and the new look and feel is a common top navigation, like there is in Office 365, and a lot of those elements can now be programmed to go to Office 365. The first two that we introduced was OneDrive and Yammer. And in 2016, we're bringing that ability to connect to Delve and Office 365 Video. And that's relatively lightweight hybrid. We're not trying to fool anybody. And my job today is to make sure absolutely clear that doesn't mean that Delve and the Office Graph are coming inside of anything on premises. They will live in the cloud, same as Yammer, same as OneDrive for Business. But managing who you are through the on-premises site you logged into on through to whatever service of those 4 you may wire up and connect from a hybrid perspective, you land as who you are, and it's a nice user experience, and a lot of that authentication handling is really what that is about. We also announced that we will be backporting the support for Delve as a hybrid redirect in SharePoint Server 2013. I don't want to claim it's going to be Service Pack 2, but I believe that's the plan. So the next Service Pack, or a next cumulative update, you will get that capability for 2013. So it's not a requirement to upgrade to 2016. So a couple of sessions that were pretty important here. First time we talked about this new hybrid search component. If you wanted to review that, they did a really nice job showcasing it and demoing it. That was Breakout 3.1.3.4. And then all of the innovation they've been putting into BCS certainly lands in 2016 and the cloud is 4.1.1.3. If you're interested in running the labs, I think I have this right, but for the next 30 days, you can go into a virtual environment, load up the labs, keep trying them. So keep hammering away at those. And there were about 6 or 7 new hybrid hands-on labs that were built specifically for Ignite. So definitely make sure you get those. So next section was next-gen portals. This is actually something that I'm pretty close to, working with Adam, who you see pictured here, and his team. And really, Adam is focused on next-gen portals. He's also going to be focusing on what we're doing around ECM going forward. And he contributes also to some of the SharePoint elements that you'll see in Office 365 groups. So we had a pretty good turnout and shared a lot of information about this new motion, which is really building portals that are ready to go, intelligent because they're connected to the Office graph, social because they're inherently connected to Yammer in a more inline experience. They're mobile because we're shipping mobile apps and focused on responsive design. And then that ready-to-go motion is, these are things that we've been watching people do for the last 10 years that typically take 6 to 8 months of development, lots of budget and time, and then change management over time. It doesn't just stop, though, at the ready-to-go. We also are starting to talk about what we're going to do for custom going forward. And that could be, as is today, the publishing infrastructure, or going forward, custom portals that you might build in a more Azure way, but connected through the APIs, maybe a CMS service that we put in so it helps you build faster, and then that big focus on mobile, hopefully helping you get quicker responsive pages to market rather than spending your time doing that. So we had a lot of sessions and got a lot of good feedback. The team here is very open because we've shipped one of them. The other we're about halfway done shipping, and then really the two that we want to do next are coming over the next year, year and a half. And we laid the foundation of what those building blocks are, got a good reception, hopefully making the right connections of what they were and not trying to make it confusing. One of my favorite things that I saw through the week was this T-shirt. I don't know if you can see it here. And one thing with Sway is you can't zoom in too easily, so I'm not going to try to break anything. But it basically says, Office 365 Next-Gen Portals rock. Not planted by Microsoft, made it before you came here. That was kind of fun to see. And then this was the session that we had with the Office 365 video, where we were working with the Azure Media Services team to really kind of go into that next level of detail. But the two other things that we talked about, besides the general overview, which is this session, 2173, video that I just mentioned, we talked about a new knowledge management portal and the building blocks and the methods of how we'll get there. And the team behind that really starts in a very methodical, what do they need? What are they used to, and what can we do maybe that's a little bit different to add to that experience? And then we've been working pretty closely with the Delve team, specifically on the new profile experience in Office 365. And this is meant to really focus on the types of portals people would build around people expertise. Certainly a feature of search, and really bringing that into when you find somebody, what is it you discover about them? And it doesn't mean always go to their profile. And it doesn't mean that the person needed to always fill out a bunch of stuff that they never do anyway. A lot of this is driven by machine learning and of course, intelligent design. And then this is a really fun session if you missed it. These are two of our engineers, one of them who reports directly to Adam, that really just dove under the covers and showed you how we're doing all this stuff, with a little teaser at the end on what does custom look like in the future. And they did a really nice job. Two recent blog posts that we put out for a little further reading. The most recent one on video, when we brought it into production, it's now worldwide. We announced that here, that we're now at 100%. And then people experiences that really kind of show what we're doing there and what we're planning to do next. So next level of things you might have questions on or heard throughout the week was custom development. Quick question, I'll throw out something. The guy pointing, who is he? Paolo, okay. What size shirt generally? What size shirt do you wear generally? All right. I'll find one I don't have. So Paolo Pagliorsi, if I get his name right.
Can we see this shirt?
Oh, sorry, yeah. You don't want this maybe? All right, so it's not SharePoint related. Those are I'm saving for the other ones, but it's the Office 365 Network shirt. So I don't want to disappoint that this is not all SharePoint, but the team behind that has given us a lot of great foundational ways to connect with the community. So I support them heavily, and I think they're at about 60,000 users on the public network. So I'm doing a lot of advertising for them. And then the other things I have to throw out are these watches, and I'll explain it, and then I'll move on. These watches are the dumbest watch I've ever seen. They're so dumb, they do nothing. There's no checking Twitter on them. There's absolutely no following the sway that I have here if you follow that bit.ly link. What it does, though, it tells the time. Push of a button tells the time. Pretty dumb, huh? So I've got 4 of those to hand out. And those are good for throwing, so interaction in the back. So obviously, Paulo is here at the booth. He's a really great developer that works outside of Microsoft. The team behind it, though, if you're a developer, you can't miss who they are. They've been doing really great work, sharing last week at Build, this week at Ignite, but they're also really reinventing dev.office.com, podcast. You know, we've got Jeremy Thake on our side. He's great for evangelism, but he's also super deep. He's the right guy. And the team that he's on, he's not on the same team anymore. He's on a really good team no matter who he's reporting to, but since I'm guessing a lot of you have some SharePoint history here, he used to report to Arpan Shah when he first joined. And if you know Arpan, he's great at doing this. And you. And he put a really nice team together, and they're working really hard. So a lot of what they focused on, both at Build and here, and there is a blog at the end, I'll scroll one more time, that really captures a lot of this more in depth. And like I said in the beginning, I am not your deep developer. I just like what they do because sometimes they build good, nice, cool demos for me. But I usually work for them. So they're obviously talking about this consolidation of APIs at the Office 365 level so that it's more of a singular REST endpoint. The new app model certainly has matured a lot. If you reviewed, a year or 2 ago when we started talking about it with 2013, you might have thought, whoa, I can't do all my full trust code like that. That's just going to fall short in many ways. But cut to 6 months later, keep going forward. More and more people are starting to think, if I can build it in the new app model, I will. If I can't, maybe I should wait a little bit and just do more of a hybrid approach or just keep it where it's at. And then we're not trying to limit there on what's possible. And this team with Rob Lefferts, who is our lead engineer now, across not just SharePoint but Office, I think is doing a really great job. And we've got, of course, 10 years of full trust code innovation to try to leap ahead. But again, full trust code not going away. From an API-specific perspective, we started to show and talk about the Office Graph APIs, Groups APIs, and video. I believe all of them are in preview. I don't think anything's been released. I'm not quite sure where they're at with groups. I know some of them are going to go a little faster than others. But there's all that now new information on MSDN. A lot of what you saw here, especially if you went to the Office Graph battle, was pretty clever and pretty interesting solutions people are building with those now APIs that we've been building off are made public. There also was a really great session about, there's a couple sessions, one that I linked here, around how do you build full trust code today with the intent that it may sometime go to the cloud. So it really revolves around you're still doing full trust type solutions on premises, but the footprint of the full trust component might be a lot smaller, and you're really breaking it apart. And we had Bob German and I believe Chris O'Brien he was paired with that had a really nice session that grounds it in the reality of we know not everybody is in the cloud and may never be or may not be for a while. Whatever the case, there's new patterns that are very cloud-oriented patterns that you can benefit for on-prem, and if you do move to that solution online or into Azure, then you will have less of a lift to get it there. And then certainly there's a team. The one that I work closely with is a guy named Vesa, and I won't try to pronounce his last name in front of you. But if you know Vesa, he's a great resource. He's very community-oriented, and he really was here at Ignite to share everything that he's been doing with the team, like Steve Walker and a lot of folks from the MVP community, to really push the P&P out. So there's a ton of sessions. Again, a couple that I just linked to here. The biggest one that we had was the foundational session with Rob Lefferts and Jeremy around how Office development matters. And then looking at the full trust conversion and looking at how to take advantage of the Office app model. And then we had one on branding. We actually had a couple sessions on branding. This one was more for developers. The other was more around performance tuning for IT and design. And then just a grounding around how we can do this lifecycle management much better and not have the cloud move be so scary. They did come out with a blog post shortly after Build. I took the whack Build off because it's relevant whether you are at Build or Ignite. And it gives a lot of nice visuals, a lot of nice read-through. And then, of course, if you haven't looked at this recently, dev.office.com is really got this guy behind it now. And hopefully that's not being stretched like I see it. I think he was being stretched this week. Anybody know Jeremy? All right. So if you don't, great resource. If you are a Twitterer, he's a good one to follow from a developer's perspective. And then who's this guy? That was just me trying to learn, what do I need to learn about dev just so I can be a little dangerous? So then last section here, and then really to kind of go into your Q&A, and hopefully I haven't gone too much over than what I thought, is there's a lot that we're doing with SharePoint in online, and it's not just SharePoint Online. And we're really kind of in this middle point where we're really kind of thinking, maybe we don't brand everything SharePoint Online. Maybe it just is powered by SharePoint. Maybe it's a service. There's the shirt. Oh, no, that's not the shirt. I showed your shirt earlier. This is Martin, everybody who had the Next Gen Portals rocks. But it's this concept of powered by SharePoint. You all have been doing it for years. You're building your solutions on top of SharePoint. Guaranteed that when your end user hit your business solution, you didn't front and center say, hey, you're in a SharePoint thing. And we're taking that tact, and the other teams are as well. One of the most significant types of moves wasn't a SharePoint one. But if you go to the app launcher in Office 365 and you click it out and you see all the services, there used to be one that said Outlook with the common Outlook logo. What is it called now? Mail. And talk to the Outlook team and try to figure out how many hours they went over that one just from a branding perspective. But the intent was, it's just your mail. It's just your calendar. It's just that there's a lot of new brands, certainly, and we think that there's room for brand and sometimes room for the brand to disappear into the background. But it's a fully functioning SharePoint 2016 +++ that's really powering a lot of new things. So I thought we could just sort of end on not only seeing our booth before you guys messed it up. So clean. So clean. So many devices without thumbprints on them. But here, powered by SharePoint, is my list. Obviously, SharePoint Online. Some of these weren't direct announcements that we had in sessions. That's one thing that I struggled with a little bit when we did the lineup for what SharePoint sessions with the allocation that we had. We were thinking of having a SharePoint Online session. At the end of the day, it didn't seem to make sense because we had so many sessions that were about components about SharePoint Online. And it's no longer this one singular thing. It's, again, this thing that's powering a lot of experiences. But some of the specific things that are soon to roll out, or certainly we would have been talking about it, should have, or would have there been a SharePoint session, SharePoint Online. We're moving from a 2 gig file limit up to 10 gigs. We also have an initial amount of storage that we're giving to our Office 365 customers, small and large, and education, government, anything in the multi-tenant space is going to get a terabyte instead of a 10 gig default, and still the calculation of 500 megs, or what we're trying to kind of reframe around, you get a half a gig per person. So still lots of storage, but for our customers that weren't quite as large as a 5,000, 10,000 seat or above, at least they get a little bit more to start with, especially when we start to introduce things like video that will eat up a little bit more storage. We also had a great session with a guy named Sarat who talked about external sharing and all that we're doing there. And that's an area where it feels like full trust code. We're not there, but we're getting there, and it's going to get a lot better and a lot more connected to Office 365 instead of being this SharePoint siloed experience. And it'll pull in the other things that calendaring, IAM, and whatnot are doing. And then finally, we've been doing a lot to optimize the pages. I'll throw out a watch to anybody who can guess, if you stretched where the boundaries are based on this list, what's the most let me make sure it's on here. Yes, it is. What is the most performant page based on SharePoint in Office 365? And it's in this list. OneDrive. Nice. Watch coming your way. Apologize for any bruises. So OneDrive for Business, the UI, and they talked about the next level of UI changes coming here, is the most performant thing. And the kind of proof point there is when you call support and you say, my portal or my site is running a little slow, what's the deal? The first thing they're going to ask you to do is launch your OneDrive for Business page, whoever it's calling, their page. And that page should load as fast as anything SharePoint running can. And then they say, is that running slow? If not, then they start to troubleshoot and navigate through what might be going on with that custom this, custom that you've done to the team or portal. So there's been a lot of innovation around, obviously, OneDrive for Business, team sites, and anything that loads up and comes from SharePoint. We want that to be super fast. But Office 365 has its roots in SharePoint Online. A lot of that is around storage, metadata, obviously where the pages themselves are loaded from, and then the back-end site collections where every channel has their videos and some of the permissions model that applies to individual channels. OneDrive for Business certainly has its roots. It used to be called what when it was first introduced in my sites? Watch. One person raise their hand and yell it. Ooh, before that. What was it used to be called? In My Sites, it used to be called? My Documents. Where was that? All right. Again, oh gosh. I knew that was a bad idea. I'll walk it back next time. Right there, yeah, exactly. They may be dumb, but I bet they hurt, so I apologize. So obviously OneDrive for Business is going through a Herculean effort in areas that I am staying away from when I call it SharePoint Unplugged. This is not OneDrive for Business Unplugged. Please don't ask me about Sync. There's a whole session on that, and Jason Moore did actually a really great job. But it does, Office 360, OneDrive for Business is, of course, built on SharePoint, and it benefits from that greatly. And it certainly is the business side of something that also has consumer, and it's really interesting to see where those are going. But delve in Office Graph, and this will be a T-shirt, and I'll try to save some things during the thing. What is the Office Graph built on top of? Search. Yep, so it was fast. So fast is getting some innovation, certainly. A lot of the innovation, though, is in the Office Graph. But without the fast search index, or just the enterprise search index, the Office Graph is just a layer on top of a mud pile. But it, of course, Delve has some of the experience in the profile, and we talked about that a little bit from a next-gen portals perspective. And a lot of things that we're doing to pull in information from a lot of different areas are based on some of those hooks. We're taking signals to the graph, but it's based on some of the work, certainly, that the FAST team did. And it is that team that's building the graph. One non-SharePoint thing that's fed by the graph, which obviously then feeds off of the FAST index, is Clutter. Clutter is a new Exchange thing that helps you manage your mailbox. So SharePoint has a few hooks into Clutter. Groups, Office 365 Groups specifically, benefits from the files side of things. Get files based on SharePoint team sites, the document libraries. And some of the sites that they talked about here that's coming will have some of its grounding around SharePoint. They won't look just like a team site that you've seen in the past, but certainly derived and built on top of that same infrastructure. People experiences, I think I've talked that one through. Modern attachments, a watch to throw. Why does modern attachments have any significance to SharePoint in Office 365? Where specifically? All right, I'll give it to you because you weren't too far behind having it. And these don't fly straight, so I apologize. So when you are in today Outlook web app and you go and navigate and attach a file and send it on through so it goes to somebody, hopefully the intent is you just keep the file where it is and you're just providing a link back to it. Not a new thing that we invented, but the way that we're doing it we think is very smart in that if the file doesn't yet live in OneDrive, it goes there and anybody on the to line gets permission so that they can view it. A lot easier way to share content, and I guarantee if you start playing with it a little bit, it's a much easier way to do it, and it's coming to Office 2016, so you'll have that same experience on the desktop. But again, grounded in the file goes to OneDrive for Business if it's not there already. And then document conversations is just something that we benefit by connecting to Yammer. We also do it for video, so we don't call it video conversations, but you can think of it that way. If I'm looking at a document using Office Online, there's a little slide out to have Yammer conversations side by side for that document. And of course, that's powered by Office Online, Yammer, and then ultimately where the document lives. Doesn't have to be anything, but it's usually going to be a SharePoint document library or OneDrive for Business. So there's a lot of things that should be attributed to SharePoint, but we don't lead with it. But hopefully back to Mark's question before we got started is, if you still think SharePoint is dead, good luck killing it. This horse is still racing. So I can scroll up and down. That's really the end. The last thing I was going to click into is just a couple of fun pictures I took. And this is just for me to buy time until our hosts with the mics. If you have any questions, this is really to open it up, whatever questions you have. If we can't hustle a mic to you, I will repeat it. I try to do pretty well at that. And I'll just say thanks to Mavention for the stroopwafels they brought from the Netherlands. Almost everybody represented. The only tag they didn't have was OneDrive for Business, and I think that's just because it wasn't synced over yet. And if you didn't see the monkey, you'll see one today flying to somebody. There was a big monkey. He was pretty fun, and we'll make sure to bring him back. And then, did everybody enjoy Fallout last night? It's pretty fun. I certainly feel a little older than I kept referring to. They sound a little bit like Bon Jovi. And that just revealed me. So with that, first question, if it's at the microphone, if not, we'll have time to make it all the way around. Question?
All right, so not exactly a OneDrive sync question, but
okay.
Do we see any of the selective sync capabilities from OneDrive coming into SharePoint document libraries?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll answer what they did say, and then I'll try to kind of formulate, I think, where we're going and what I can say. So the question around sync, the consumer version of OneDrive for consumers, even though we just call it OneDrive, does have selective sync, meaning you could have a terabyte of content, but on your little tablet that has 250 megs of SSD that's super precious for your next movie on the plane, we don't want to take up that space, so you can obviously opt out of things to sync over. In OneDrive for Business today, it's all or none, and so that is coming to OneDrive for Business. From a team site perspective, the team is really at a stage where they're trying to look at this next-gen sync client that they talked about here, if that will be applied to team sites, and that both is on-premises, and that's both SharePoint Online team sites. Where I think we are is that will continue to be Groove, which is the sync client that we know today, which is going to get continued investments. And if you tried that thing, which we all joke about, and there's a reason for it, we're not aside to what the problems are. But if you looked at it about 6 months ago, it was really bad. And a lot of that is just because we hit scale. We've had a 500% growth of content coming in. And that technology is, but there is a team that will be investing to continue that for on-premises, SharePoint 2016, SharePoint 2013, and of course SharePoint Online on the team side. What I think they will review, but I don't think it'll be in the first iteration of Next-Gen Sync, is how can we do what we did for OneDrive for team. But a lot of why we need to keep it as is because of on-premises, not everybody's going to run to 2016 right away. So of course we will maintain that. And with that, not need to shift too quickly, it'll apply to online team sites as well. Good question.
Your point is my mojo.
All right, that means he gets a prize. So if you didn't know why Daniel just stood up, it's because there was just a tweet that just went out that said, the first person who stands up and says that. So thank you for playing. All right, next question.
I have two questions.
Okay.
My first question is, in Germany, there's a bigger problem. Everybody loves Office 365, but the CEOs and all the other management don't trust the cloud service.
Yep.
How you manage this trouble and how you convince these people?
Yeah, I don't know if it's only because the data center is not in Germany. Maybe. I know that Germany, I think Japan, but I know Germany for sure, has data sovereignty, where they want everything within the country. To be honest, it feels like the conversations are sometimes around that, sometimes around the EU model clause, like, is this an American company that has my data and what are they going to do with it? A lot of it is just a transparency. We do talk about the feature set. There's a lot of interest in what you can do. There's a lot that you can do around hybrid. The thing that I've seen make the most motion, not just with Germany, but for anybody that's reserved about going to the cloud, is from a hybrid model, especially search. All it's doing is it's putting the metadata on the elements up into the cloud and giving you a view on where is my stuff and how can I find it. But it seems like some of the feedback we're getting is the progress is we don't move the content. You may be thinking of a migration, but there are ways that you don't have to migrate. The other area of investment that we've, I think, been investing more than people realize is just plain security. And that's at every level. So we like to challenge a little bit, look at what we're doing. We're super open and have workshops, and we'll go as deep as anybody wants, that just purely talks about how your data is secure, how it's private, the SLAs that are behind that, the people that are behind that. So it's hard to move the needle on when somebody just says, we won't do it if it's not in Germany. And to that I say, ich bin, I don't know, something. But the reality is, exactly, ich bin SharePoint. The reality is, it's just a conversation, and sometimes the needle moves and sometimes it doesn't, and it's different in different sectors and different kind of customers. But we have seen folks, interested and okay about certain type of workloads moving to the cloud, and some of that is it HBI, which is is it super critical and highly confidential type information, all the way down to LBI, and these are our internal terms, so I apologize, but LBI meaning it's probably just a team site, offsite photo type thing. But those levels, and LBI and MBI, were actually the first things to be okayed by our internal teams. One of them sitting here, so he'll raise his hand if I'm saying something wrong. But the MSIT team at our organization, within Microsoft, our own tenant, in the multi-tenant space, just like everybody, it also took some time to get to where they would be okay with where HBI content lived. And they did some unique things around some app model and some user awareness. And of course, with DLP and encryption at rest and some of those other things coming, there's just a ton of reasons why people should look again, ask the question again. And if it's still just because, then we'll just talk to them in 6 months again and see where they're at. Because I think the value that they get by moving to the cloud will erase some of that. Some of it is law-based, and there's some things we can't do about that. So, second question?
Second question is SharePoint related. We have a big SharePoint environment in our company with a lot of servers, and we right now evaluate if we should stay in the future on-prem, if we should move in a hybrid solution or in the cloud. What are the main arguments or the main topics that we should take in consideration to make this decision?
So I think there's reality that's surfaced over the last couple of years is you just can't move everything all at once. And there may be specific groups that need it more than others. And certain workloads just work better in the cloud. A lot of that is because they're either mobile is really important to access news, to access your documents that you work with all the time. And some of it is, it's just because it's internet facing, you don't have to go through some of the same hurdles. But we do support things like two-factor authentication, so you can still move relatively critical workloads. The way that they did it, and again, I'm kind of using this as a reference, my documents to OneDrive for Business for Microsoft, at the time it wasn't 120,000 people, but I believe now that's roughly the number, at least 100,000 plus. That was one of the first workloads to move. And then all of our team collaboration sites was the next thing to move. And then what David and team shared here is they had a whole session on how Microsoft is moving all of their portals. And there's a company intranet, there's what we are using for our media distribution, and then there's also talk about moving that to Office 365 video. And it's been incremental, and they've had some hooks to connect with the systems back on premises, just from a hybrid perspective. And then transparently, there's just things that haven't moved yet, or maybe won't move for some time. I don't think hybrid is scary as it used to be. We have a lot of great documentation on how to do single sign-on. We've got a lot of great people that have been trained on it so that they can accomplish that more. That's the foundational thing. And then it's just is it a pilot phase? Do you want to just try the cloud to see what it's like? That's very possible. Pull back anytime you want. But from a cost model, the effort, certainly we don't hide. There is effort to migrate content if there's anything that's been customized to make sure it lands intact. And to be aware all along the way what are going to be some of the common pitfalls. And that's a lot of what we shared here at the conference. So I think it's more of just get started. And it's not listen to me because I, of course, would love it if you did. The reality is there's benefits to it. And we're not hiding the services in Office 365 so you move there. That is not a winning strategy. That's why we have all of the APIs we're turning out. That's why we're doing the hybrid motion. The reality, though, is some of the things that we do in the cloud we can't put in the box and know your environment to test them well enough and then to support them over time with the changes that you make. So we hope that connecting to them or potentially moving to them is something that you can do incrementally, if not maybe significantly at some point. But just getting started is usually a great thing. And then tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. You're welcome. All right, next question.
I had a question about what seems to be missing so far at Ignite, and that's
oh, there you go.
that's InfoPath.
Oh, yeah, good.
I know it's deprecated, but I know how heavily it's used under the hood by things like workflow, so it's not going to go away anytime soon. What's the recommendation going forward, and if that recommendation is JS Link and client-side rendering, is there going to be more documentation and information coming out of Microsoft about that?
Yep. So I'll take a deep breath, and I'll say I am not Sonia Koptiev, but I certainly will try to copy her today. The key thing is InfoPath is not going away, and if this sounds a little bit like regurgitation of what we put out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, InfoPath 2013 will be supported through 2023. So starting and using InfoPath today is not a terrible idea, or continuing, or what's up there. But there won't be a version next. And we're trying to be really clear on that. The other thing is in SharePoint 2016, there will still be InfoPath form services as you know it today. So, upgrade won't break anything from a forms perspective. Of course, it'll continue to be supported in 2013, and it will continue to be supported in SharePoint Online, which started in its instance recently as 2013, but is really beyond that. So the other area that a lot of people ask about is workflow, like you said. Workflow doesn't also go away. SharePoint 2010 workflows, which are workflows running inside of SharePoint. Hopefully, maybe more have been playing around with SharePoint 2013 workflows, which means the workflows run in Azure. Both of those and those patterns are sometimes choices. We have preferences, but we don't expect everybody to jump ship and go one way so fast. And those same patterns will be in 2016 and going forward, connected to Visual Studio, writing some hardcore workflow activities and having them run. And then, of course, the K2s and Nintex of the world adding a ton of value, and that continues. Next question.
I'm glad that we are going towards the multi-device support. But what I have not heard is all the SharePoint provided features and functions, do they work across multiple devices? An example, I can give you the Explorer view. A lot of people still think that SharePoint is nothing but a shared drive and map it a SharePoint site to there as a network map drive and drag and drop the files, and losing a lot of metadata, saving functionality, automatically checked out to them. They never know that the document has been checked out, and the function doesn't work on Mac.
Yep.
So what are these paths? So make all the functions and features work the same way on all the devices, or shut them out.
Yeah, we don't have the 100% answer. A lot of it was rooted that there was so much based on ActiveX, and certainly beyond ActiveX, anything that was a SharePoint specific, feature or development pattern. So if you look across the various versions across the years, we've been lessening the amount of requirement for ActiveX. So there's a lot more you can do across the browsers. When you land on specific things that you mentioned, I think the same development patterns that we're promoting for people to build their own custom solution, the team is also adhering to, and that's specifically, you can look at that as what they're doing for OneDrive for Business, next-gen portals, and some of the working groups. They're following the same patterns, which at the end of the day equates to there's more based on not SharePoint proprietary methods, more based on open standards, which our intent is to make it so that you can do a lot of common experiences across browsers and certainly across the larger platforms. When it drills into a specific one and when's that going to be resolved, I can follow up with the team if you send me an email. I don't know exactly, but the footprint is getting smaller and smaller for where we require things that required IE. If you do an interesting experiment, if you look at what the experience is on Project Spartan, now known as Microsoft Edge, it also is in that same camp. It's not IE. It's certainly grounded and rooted in it. And I'm not fluent on it, so don't quote me on anything. But I was a little hesitant to load my machine up with Windows 10, Office 2016, and go for Spartan. That was the booth, and it was pretty good. But still hit some areas that were like, okay, maybe they're not finished and they're not shipped yet, so give them that. But it's built in a way that is not to adhere to these back-end services that are specifically Microsoft to Microsoft. They're built with open standards in mind. So why I'm saying that is I think that will drive a lot of, if it doesn't work in Spartan, of course if it doesn't work in Chrome, Firefox, Safari, other, but we think of them as more modern browsers. We want our experience to be common across them. It may be, I'd say a 50 to 75% answer, but hopefully indicative of what I'm aware of and where I think we're going.
So, sorry, ready?
Over here.
All right, so I have two more specific questions, more via,
right. Sorry.
Is this possible?
Yes.
Like, can I do this?
Is this possible? Okay.
Yes,
you can do anything on SharePoint.
If only that were true. So, my first question is regarding drop-off libraries and maintaining the link to documents when routed to their final location. Specifically, if I publish a link to a central drop-off library to my users' Office applications, so they can send it there via Word or Excel, can they send all those docs to that drop-off library, but then have the system set up a link to the file within a separate library based on that document's content type, with the final location of the document going to a third library based on specific metadata?
So you want to take the A train to the B train, and you're not going to make it to the airport.
Yeah.
I think there are things that would play into that. I'll be honest.
Just say if it's yes or no, and I will find out if it's a yes.
The reality is,
if
when a file drops into a location, which sounds like not the first stop. There are a lot of move type scenarios. So if a workflow triggered and was to transfer to move that, it's an on-premises, I think for sure. In online, I don't think we support site collection to site collection yet.
Okay.
So that move, if you think about my common repository, or if it's in an education space, here's all the students' homework. I do all the grading. I trigger something that sends it off to the record center. I don't know what you would call that in education, but that would be the final grade that they get, so that they can't challenge it. That thing we didn't change. Nobody can touch it. Can't be deleted. All those policies. Mm-hmm. Getting it from there to there might not make sense for a teacher and student, because obviously somebody would have to set it up. It's not for everybody to establish. But I think if you talk to some folks like our mic runners, they'll tell you that's a great solution that I think would be custom dev, and you may have a component in between that's a sort of a listening mechanism for workflow. But moving, you can certainly do file movement with API calls and make it so it's not so scary. Developer, once it's set up, just happens and goes. So that's I think a pretty common pattern. But I don't want to oversell it. Also, anybody disagrees anytime, just call my.
I will see you after.
Call my initials, which are not BS.
Perfect. So my second question, also as specific as the first,
okay,
is regarding content search web parts and site templates. So if I'm utilizing site templates to mass produce sites,
yep,
is there a way to set the default term for that page within the content search web part to be dynamic and set to a metadata tag that matches a unique element within the site's URL?
All right. So you get your choice of either a watch or a really tiny T-shirt. And I at least have some friends that are some pretty deep search experts. My first instinct would be, if you have a common term store, mm-hmm, where you're feeding not just at a site collection level, but at a tenant level, and certainly on-prem it might be at the farm level. We haven't done anything from a cross-hybrid metadata management. I think there are third-party solutions that can help you get a common term set. It's a little bit more from a replication today. But if that's true, and I'll wait till anybody says it's not true, then that term that you have that may be the trigger or the commonality should be the same term, no matter where it appears or how you leverage it. That being said, I would certainly turn you to somebody that would be able to go, what are you trying to do? Okay. So watch or shirt?
I'll take the tiny shirt, please.
Okay. All right. Good questions. Oh, hey.
Sorry.
No worries. All right. I don't know if there's a mic. Yep. There you go.
Okay. Mine's on hybrid. We typically tend to be a version behind. So we're going to just be upgrading to 2013. But we want to use the hybrid. So how will that work? So you're going to go to 2016 online now. Mm-hmm. We'll be 2013 on-prem.
Yep.
And so if we stay a version behind consistently, how will that work?
Yeah, it'll just work, really. It doesn't jump over the fact that you have work to do to set it up and manage it. And then, obviously, when you go from 2013 to 2016, and first, just a small round of applause that you're on 2013. That's not that far behind. But the reality is we've been supporting hybrid back to 2010. Some things you can and can't do very easily. There's a lot of ease on 2013 because, by the way, the infrastructures are relatively common. 2013 to 2016, from an infrastructure perspective, those types of connections isn't changing in the way that it would break those types of solutions. But you're setting up single sign-on. You're setting up a part of the component called ADFS on premises. Once that's connected, then the next level of work is, am I using BCS to connect to a back-end data source? Am I doing Power BI stuff that really isn't us related anymore, but it's the same pattern? And when you move from 2013 to 2016, there's a lot of things to check and do during the upgrade, and we'll have that heavily documented. And there's a lot of hybrid documentation during an upgrade that Bill and obviously the engineering and some of our writers are working on. So I don't think the issue is what you should be concerned about, whether it's version X or Y here and there. What we support is that you can accomplish hybrid. Some of it is don't worry about the version in the cloud because we don't version it. But we're cognizant of what we put out as far as a hybrid potential is something that would, of course, work with 2013 to whatever you might think is in the cloud. You should still think of it as 2013, 2016, going forward, especially in the cloud. That is the foundation we're building off of with our intent that we don't go through a significant upgrade in the cloud again.
So if we stayed on 2013 for like the next 5, 6 years,
2 years.
we'd be okay.
I think so. I mean, certainly 5 years from now, Bill Gates could be the CEO again, but no. It's the patterns will be there, and we'll be very transparent about changes that we're making. But in that space, you are really trying to make a connection that's a solid connection to your AD environment, so your user, when they get pinged, who are you, who are you, who are you? It's the same source, so you're not getting blocked there. And then making the connections to your data sources in a way that, again, doesn't break with what we do in the cloud, because we know people are doing it. And the way that you maintain on premises, I think, is just more of a you need to know X and Y before you do it, but it's not a you can't do it.
Hi. A quick question. I've got a number of large customers who've expressed interest recently in access services, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And my question is, will access services still exist in 2016? And if it does, has there been any investment made in it?
Good questions. A good question. So one broader statement I'll try to make and hold true by nature of I've got Bill Baer, who said something similar in his sessions, or if you had asked him, and Bill is 10 times smarter than I am when it comes to under-the-cover stuff. But nothing is being deprecated from what you knew as SharePoint 2013 moving into 2016. Only the improvements, or there may be like a little feature, and maybe not so little in terms of how people built on it, which we've communicated heavily, that got deprecated from the cloud. And the two that I can land on there are tags and notes and my tasks. Beyond that, those do have replacements in terms of one we haven't yet talked a lot about, and you'll hear about it, and shame on us for kind of pulling the plug a little early. But beyond that, access services there, InfoPath services there, XL services is there. If you're on-prem, full trust code will still work. Performance points still there. Specifically for access services, I don't think there's been a lot of investment made, except for make sure it works, make sure it's tested. And I think it's indicative of, we've been trying to leverage access a lot more. And, we're sort of at that crux where we're not quite getting the developer love for it yet, because it just isn't a developer tool. And it maybe isn't quite yet easy enough for me. And again, me representative of somebody who's not, your Laura Rogers or Jennifer Mason type folk. But that being said, I think there is a lot of investment in that space in the future. And that team, I wouldn't be allowed to say a whole lot, and probably not as deep as you'd want me to answer confidently. But I do think it is an area that will get a lot more focus, again, because we're targeting something that's not your deep developer or Visual Studio. Everybody has to use that to do everything. So good question. The main thing is, yes, it's totally supported, access services. And that the newest thing from Access 2013 is that the database goes to Azure. That doesn't change. So again, no real change, I guess, is my easy answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, whoever gets the mic next. It doesn't mean you get the monkey. It just means I'm flinging it. And I'm going to do it during your question.
Yeah, perfect. An additional question to the hybrid scenarios, yeah?
Okay.
One thing which is nice on hybrid scenarios is that you can use your workloads wherever they are best.
Yep.
But the user experience is different to on-prem and hybrid. And when I think about the colleague here with we stay one version behind, it can be, or it will be a problem if users coming to a on-prem solution which acts differently.
Yep.
So what is your plan about getting a more consistent user experience between on-prem and O365 or SharePoint Online or whatever?
Good question, and let's see what the monkey has to say about that. All right, next question.
Oh, thanks. Good answer.
No. When we started the journey around hybrid, the big thing around it was there is still a lot that is on customer or partner to accomplish. And so if you connect these environments and you navigate between team sites in the cloud and maybe even team sites or portals on-prem, there is going to be a different look and feel. And there are things that you can do about that, but certainly that's the onus. The second half, and so that's, I think, both design and navigation. And I remember one customer we met with, they were really excited. They connected up hybrid search, which at the time was just a federated query, and search results, and all was good. But then they started on their next level, which was navigation between. And And it wasn't I was just listening to an architect who was like, you might want to put in a link back to where they came from based on where they landed. And you can't do that across everything. It doesn't make sense on a team site if you just came from a portal, but maybe it does, depending on what you keep as your master page elements across more places. The other area of that is as we move to 2016, if you upgrade with us there, you're going to get some of the user elements that came from the cloud where that destination might be. So hybrid and on-prem over time will be more similar. And I think that's strongest in OneDrive for Business. Again, not saying that that's the name or not the name in SharePoint 2016, but effectively where you have your personal work documents should look a lot more like what's in the cloud. And that might not be so exciting because not everybody does a split deployment of OneDrive for Business, but you can. But most of the time, it's everybody eventually ends in the cloud. But the same will be true for team sites. So a lot of the innovation we've done in team sites in the cloud, more around performance and some around UX tuning, and some of the elements around friendlier UI for document libraries will come down. So I think there's a sort of a leapfrog effect. As you get more years down the road, it'll hopefully become less and less disturbing going from place to place. The app launcher. Oof, I don't know if I got a pay grade coming out of Ignite. So the question down here was, will the app launcher be consistent, if you're in a hybrid state? As far as I know, it'll still be a top navigation, similar if you were a 2013 hybrid. I'm not aware of plans to bring the app launcher down. But when we talk about hybrid and the new elements that come, when you wire them up, either in 2013 for Delve, OneDrive, and Yammer, or in 2016 including video, it's more of a top navigation element that lights up and then is wired into the cloud. So I don't think there's an announcement. I don't think I'm breaking anything, but that's my awareness.
Hello.
Take here and then back in the front.
Yeah. So thanks for the session here and taking questions. But,
you're welcome.
So I have clients who are pretty hesitant about moving beyond the base level like threshold guidances in SharePoint because they operate their SharePoint forms as like as a shared service for all the various people who use it. So they don't want to bog it down and whatnot if they extend thresholds too far. So like they've stayed with the base 50 megabyte default file threshold, which can be a problem. So when you're expanding thresholds like this, is like we talked about, like the ultimate file size and maybe list thresholds, that 5,000 item limit. Is there any new guidance or base level recommendations for that would affect clients like this? In terms of scaling, because we know, sure, it can go all the way up to that level, but is that really what's recommended? And are we going to have clients who are going to be uncomfortable, moving beyond that base recommendation?
Yeah, it's actually, I think, one of the slides that Bill showed, and some of it is, if you go to 2016, all the limits that have gone up. So there's that view. If they move to 2016, then it does change the conversation. There's a lot of scale improvements, and I'll just land on the 5,000 view limit. Is completely resolved. I mean, maybe not completely. I won't say millions and millions of things, but certainly way above what is considered an issue. There's also just your basic site collection type limits, how many sites in a site collection, those types of things. Everything does go up. And I'll just refer, if you go to Bill's on-demand session, there's a nice section where he has 4 boxes of, not exact numbers, we're working on what those final numbers will be, but definitely in introducing this idea of, yes, we've heard plenty. There was also a lot of work in 2013 where they went back and just retested a bunch of stuff at a scale that was kind of off the charts based on when they did their original testing. It doesn't mean the original testing wasn't good, and it might have been where they kind of hit the initial baseline. But a guy who used to be on the SharePoint team, a guy named Paul Andrew, who's now on the Office 365 team, headed that, and you're kind of your deep, like, let's get it right, and if there's better numbers to publish, let's prove it and then put it out there. And there's that, I think it's just the SharePoint Boundaries and Limits article on TechNet. There's a similar one for SharePoint Online, and those will get refreshed and updated. And again, if they haven't looked recently, our supported guidance is there. Hard numbers, some of them pretty large, some of them limiting, but to be improved. And all the work we're doing in SharePoint Online, again, accrues back to the SharePoint 2016 footprint. So Bill covers some big ones, that get the applause, but there's a lot of work. In the online world today, we support up to 1 terabyte site collections, and people use them big time. We've got one customer coming in who has 120 terabytes of data and is not a single tenant on the multi-tenant space. They are within, everybody that's there. So those types of things, we don't want to have those limits anymore. So a lot of work is being done to remove them. And that's why I've got kind of this one line where there's a whole team that's focused on the online infrastructure, and it's their code you're getting on-prem. So there's a lot of innovation there. So I think the answer is no, and certainly no in 2016 in a big way. Good question. Yeah. I'll repeat it. Yep. Yeah, so the question was if you're using some of the innovation around using the Office Graph APIs, or just maybe some of the next-gen portals that we're putting out, he was curious on where do those pages live. And currently they're in SharePoint because that's where they should, but they're done in a way that's a lot less bound to the published infrastructure, common around leveraging portals. So the goal there, the mantra used to be for pages, they have to be simple, they have to be fast, and maybe they don't have to be built at all. You just get them. But certainly those patterns will accrue so that people could build their own pages in that way. How that will change is just the fact that, it might change because there may be better ways to accomplish it. And we don't want to hang so many deep hooks into SharePoint where it just doesn't make sense. And the front end is one of them that, maybe, I don't know if I'll get the quote just right, but Daniel Kogan, who's one of our main next-gen portals engineers at a relatively senior level, and he's got support all the way through our kind of new Jeff Teeper, a guy named Phil Smoot, who, if you saw him here, he was kind of new into role about 2 months, so he didn't come up on stage. But anyway, we've got a new Jeff Teeper who's got a lot of interesting ways that he wants to support his team to go and do what they need to do. Don't be bound to what they had to do. And one of the areas is what you do on the front end may be something that at some point in time we may put into GitHub, and we may do some open source type activities. Nothing to announce clearly, but they are thinking of that. Like maybe we don't want to just own the front end because we want to own the REST points to get to the data that's on the back end and be, of course, the service of choice. So that's kind of the today answer. The tomorrow answer may just be dictated by what's the best pattern we can follow, and certainly prescribe after that, and whatever he said. All right, here and then in the back. PowerShell? Uh-huh.
Any planned support to get content from on-prem SharePoint to the cloud at the site, library, file level, and then actually once that content's on there to be able to manage that content via PowerShell, check-in, check-outs, and moves, and so on?
Yeah, from a PowerShell and really an API perspective, we support in the cloud everything from the tenant level down, but specifically to content, it's everything you could do within a site collection down. And there's a lot of motions around how do you get content into the cloud. And certainly we are supported greatly by third party from a mass motion. But what they introduced at the conference, and I should have listed it because it was pretty important, but it really was just a part of a session, was we now have a new migration API that makes it so that at least you're more reliable in how you talk to our service. And it really routes it to an Azure temporary store to then go around the front end so that it sneaks into the back end a lot more performantly, meaning when somebody migrates to the cloud, they're not tanking other tenants.
That was one of the sessions on your list?
Yeah, there's one. It's not too hard to find if you just do SharePoint migration. The guy who is the one you want to listen for, his name is Simon Burdages, and he's I think mostly Russian, so I might have gotten his last name wrong. But they kind of show the real world of getting content in, and certainly just introducing the new migration API. Primarily these days it's working with our ISVs, so they stop using our web services that are completely supported, but when they start a migration, our guys on the infrastructure team know it sometimes, and it is impacting, and so we sometimes have to throttle, and that's not the best way we want to treat them or ultimately our customers through them. So introducing this new API will be good for ISVs, we think good for business units, and there's some work that the Fast Track team is doing, which is a service that we provide for our customers when they first onboard into Office 365. Primarily that team is focused on mailbox migration, and they're starting to work through, gentlemen, if you know him, his name is Chemo Fours. Chemo is really trying to launch through Fast Track a better way to get content into the cloud. And to be honest, they're doing it for one of our internal portals, to get content up more successfully. Once it's in, it should be pretty straightforward PowerShell activities. Or again, if you want to more develop a solution that's either leveraging that or other. We have been transparent and open about the Files API and how to leverage it. And I'll stop there because I'm not your PowerShell guy. But I think it's everything is a yes. It's a matter of how, and there's lots of good places to go to get docs about it.
Great, thanks.
Cool. Okay, yeah, and Chemo, I think at the conference was talking about how he might share some of the things that he's working on to kind of accelerate what you're doing. So we said in the back next.
So my question is, in one of the sessions we heard that FIM was going away.
FIM, yep.
In terms of two-way export, but I didn't hear sort of a path to either replace FIM or does that become a vendor product that you're looking to add on after? Because we do some bidirectional sync work now. That was certainly something that caught my attention.
Yeah, I will claim I don't know. I do know that the identity team who owns kind of the FIM vNext or whatever we're doing in the cloud, the ultimate owner is the Azure AD team. And they're looking at, they're the ones who are kind of driving two-factor auth. They're driving, obviously, the store and the connection to when you dir sync and the replacement that's coming for dir sync. So I'd have to lean on, if you send that same question to me, I'll make sure to loop in the right folks. I know that they're changing things significantly, and it's primarily for the better. But I don't know much more than that.
Yeah. Two short questions. Will you support metadata syncing for OneDrive for Business? Second question, will you support proxy server support for web applications that they can easily connect to the internet?
The first one I know more about, I believe, in the sync session that Jason Moore led. I don't think they have a hard date that they've set, but it's certainly a lot of feedback that they're trying to land on their roadmap is to be able to have content that comes from and lands in, have more metadata intact, especially from a syncing perspective, but also a migration perspective. The second one, I don't think I know the answer. I think that's more of in the developer realm, and I wouldn't want to lead you astray. But I can get to the answer pretty quickly, but I don't think I know it off the top of my head.
Good, thanks.
Yep. So the question is, are there going to be any services in SharePoint 2016 that aren't available in SharePoint Online? And the easy answer is, if they aren't today, they won't be tomorrow. And the big ones, again, are Performance Point is not moving to the cloud, but again, we think we have a pretty good solution there around Power BI in the way that direction they're going. There is some motion around social, which may be not quite what you're asking, but I'll kind of cut it off at the knees if it was there. Social isn't going away. Certainly the same motion around we're not deprecating. But from a go-forward pattern, it's Yammer. And so there's a lot of innovation around how do we connect better to Yammer. And I think that will be iterative after 2016 ships, just from the nature of where things are at. Full trust code isn't necessarily a service per se, but that same thing is true. And then the last thing, which again is not a service, is anything you have control over in central administration, we're trying to give you more and more access to control and manage. But the first things that we're doing is really opening up a per service. So if we turn on Delve, it's not anything you do on-prem, but it is something that we want to make sure you have the right things to turn it on. Obviously, it'll be on by default. You can turn it off. And then different levels of how you can manage it and control it. But outside of that, what is true today doesn't change with 2016. But there are some things that aren't coming still. And usually it's because there are other teams that are providing it. Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of choices. Numbers of listed libraries, metadata of folders, that kind of struggle.
Yep.
Now, there's more options than just the typical team site, boards, groups.
Yep.
What would you tell the user who's sitting there?
Yep. So I'll first reference, we had a nice session with Richard Harbridge and Conwall Kipple, who gave a really, I think, a nice perspective, not a Microsoft perspective. Even though we sort of reviewed their session, we didn't dictate the session. And there's a lot of awareness around really what is Office 365 Groups. So not that that's my answer, but there is more material than what my answer will be. A big thing around team and groups is if you've done anything in a team site, it's not a rush over and move it into groups. It just isn't. They aren't the same. There is the if you have a new need for a team, certainly review what are the requirements. If it's lightweight conversation, storage of files, and a shared calendar, like Groups is going to do that really well, and they're designing it to do that really well. And it's built around the 10 people that you pulled together, not the site that you created and you invite people in and have to go through a lot of hurdles. But the other area where a team site usually isn't going away is if you customize a team site, whether that's something like what you were asking around a drop folder or just some level of customization or a business application that just happened to use a team site template, or maybe it was a full-blown portal. Groups is not trying to be that. They certainly have APIs, which will be helpful and useful, but it's not intended to go that direction. So if you have a team site on premises, moving it to online, don't migrate to Groups. But if it's important, migrate as a team site. There's no harm in that. But the Groups paradigm is really an Active Directory construct. And I'm just repeating what our kind of messaging that seems to be landing more clearly. That when I have a group of 10 people and I enable a next level of functionality in Groups, like we start using the calendar, it just works for everybody. If I put a file into it, because I started the file and we all started to collaborate on it, and then I walk away, I leave the company, I get canceled or whatnot, the file is not mine and people have just a fine time with it. And so Groups is really trying to tackle that. But they're not replacing Team. And I think actually you'll see an element of Team that comes to Groups. Same as might be kind of weird to hear, there's an element of Yammer that's coming to Groups. And I think that will make more sense when you actually see it. Or if you listen to a talk that Christoph Feisinger did, he's the one that's really, I think, providing a ton of clarity around what Groups is, because we got off a little rocky start. The last bit is, I'll kind of talk this up, but I need everybody to stand up for a second. Don't leave, but stand up. So what I have here, unfortunately, is going to be not a size for everybody, but it is from the original engineering team for SharePoint Portal Server 2001. Yeah. And I have to go on honesty, and I know a lot of you know each other, so if you see anybody who's telling me a lie, then we'll kick them in the rear and move on to the next. So I don't know if this is the best way to give it up, but certainly if you've been with SharePoint since 2013 or using SharePoint Online, just keep standing. If you've been with us since SharePoint 2010, so if you haven't, you got to sit down. So if 2013 was sort of the first time you came into SharePoint, 2010, 2007, yeah, remember, we're going for honesty here. 2003, whittling out a little bit. So obviously we were down to 2001. There's a lot of people standing here. So I just am going to ask, and it's the first person to raise their hand. You can't raise it right away, but I want to know what your first project was on 2001, and you're willing to share that story.
It was an intranet for the Copenhagen municipality.
And how did it go?
Yeah, they're still running 2003.
Oh boy. See, you're not that far behind. 2003. Well, thanks for continuing on our journey. I don't think this is directly from Jeff Teeper, but this is from his era.
Good.
So kind of a fun one to give away. So the one thing I'll say, just to close out, primarily because we all have places to go, and this blinking light and people in the back want to get out of here as well, is the conversation continues beyond Ignite. There will be, other big events, whether we drive them or they're third-party, very SharePoint-oriented ones or very broad like here at Ignite. But I also encourage you to get involved in the Office 365 network, not just because it's cool and it's on Yammer and all that, but the engineering is super clued into that. If you have something that's more of a feature request, I'd encourage you to look for the right user voice. They're absolutely gold on looking at that and making sure that we're removing more and more blockers or perceptive value things. But if I can speak specifically, we created a new next-gen portals group within the Office 365 network, because that's a team I work with, and we just sort of put all their team in there. and obviously just starting to announce some of the things, and we'll get active there. But the one that we've had open for Office 365 Video has been very active. The one that they have for OneDrive is super active. So our intent is that, keep pushing us, them. We'll push back sometimes and clarify and whatnot. But, for us, Ignite continues, and hopefully that resonates. But there are real places to land that get real attention, and definitely use them if you haven't already. But with that, thank you certainly for a great week, and stay until the end.